GaylaTrail, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I have known about you since I think 2002 when I first had my very first blog.
Wow.
Yeah, my husband, Joe Crawford, who wasn't quite my husband yet, introduced me to a few different people, and you were one of them. And I was so excited to find all of your stuff. How did you get started into blogging? Did you do the hand coding at the very beginning of web life?
Oh yeah, it was not blogging.
Yeah.
I started making the site in '99, I think. And I don't really know when I launched. It wasn't like I imagined I was going to be doing it for 20 years and I should keep track. So I didn't. And all of my files now are on like really old disks, but it was sometime around February 2000, I think, when I launched. And yeah, I was a graphic designer at the time, and I did do web stuff. I had been doing web stuff for about a year or so as my job. So prior to that, I did print. And so yeah, I just started making my own site. I already knew how to do it and had the tools. So.
Did you have an idea that you wanted to get into plants and talk about plants, or did you think of yourself as a writer, or like how did that come together?
Didn't think of myself as a writer. I did just think of it as I was making kind of a webzine. Webzines were kind of popular at the time, were just coming into. And I didn't think of it as gardening. I just thought of it as plants. It was just going to be a site about plants because I had my own personal obsession with plants. That's basically it. It took me a long time to get to a point of thinking of myself as a gardener, especially because where I was coming from felt very outside of the mainstream at the time. So it was really hard for me to get comfortable with like that kind of terminology.
Did you grow up with gardening?
No. I lived in a townhouse complex that was pretty lifeless. Nobody had a garden. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who's from the West Indies, she farmed and definitely had a connection with plants, but it wasn't something that she talked about.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there wasn't really a language for it. It was just something that she did. So when I would go, so she moved to Canada at some point, and when I would go to her seniors apartment building, her apartment, I would kind of tend to her plants, but it's so hard to talk about my background because it's so not the norm. It just happened. It was like a thing that I needed to do. So no, it's not like she showed me how to tend to her plants. I just did because they were there and I felt compelled. I was drawn to them. And I remember one defining moment that I always think about as having this much later effect on the kind of work that I do was as a little kid being on her balcony, and there was just a pail, like a regular, recycled food pail that had a plant growing in it. And I went inside and I asked her what it was, and she said potatoes. And that completely blew my mind. It's like, that's potato, and that you could grow potatoes in a bucket on the balcony of a senior's apartment building that had like no life.
Right.
So to me, it's not like, it's one of those things that I think carried with me later on. And so now, when I did start writing about plants, which eventually I recognized was gardening, I really was coming from a similar perspective. I was in my 20s. I lived in an apartment in city in a very busy area. I had a roof area. That was it. And I did just start growing food. Somehow I just did. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just figured it out as I went along. And I think that having had that experience with my grandmother, having had her, even though she didn't show me anything, she showed me by example.
Mm-hmm. So I remember the rooftop garden and I loved watching the progress of the rooftop. I love that you showed the dead season, like all the in between. You were just showing progress of what was going on. And I grew up with gardens and missed gardening and thought, well, if Gayla can do this on top of a building or in containers, or, you know, like there's a chance for me. Do you get feedback from people like me?
Yes, yeah. And I think as hard as it can be sometimes to show failure, I try to as much as possible because it's just the reality. You know, when I think it's not as difficult for me to do that now because I've been gardening for so long that I understand that failure is inevitable. Sometimes plants die and we don't always know why. Sometimes we do and we just mess up and it's fine. But it was harder when I was younger. So I think especially now I recognize how important it is to be really honest about what my experience is like, because I don't have help, you know. I have some help, but I don't have the kind of help that a lot of garden writers might even have. So I just think it's important that we show the reality so that people know.
I love that. I think that is so important. I think people come into creative endeavors and they can't figure out why they would fail and they feel terrible that they failed. And it's like, we should show more failures and make it normal.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people want to be gardeners and then they fail and think they can't do it. I mean, over the years, if I, you know, collected a dime for every time somebody said to me, I want a garden, but I can't. I have a black thumb. I kill plants. And it's like, no, it's not you. You think it is because, you know, what else do we have to go by? But it isn't. Sometimes it's our environment. We just chose the wrong plant. There's a million and one different reasons. And like I said, even if you do kill a plant, okay, maybe you lost some money or maybe somebody gave it to you and you feel kind of guilty about it, but really it happens. I still kill plants all the time.
Do you have favorite plants?
It's hard to pick a favorite.
That's what I wondered. That's what I wondered.
I go through phases.
Yeah.
There's definitely a few genera, like sort of areas that I favor to a certain degree. Like tomatoes are certainly one that I favor. Agaves. I'm all across the board though. I really cannot.
Does your favoritism lean towards ones that are easier or harder, or like, do you enjoy the trickiness, or is it the type of plant that they are?
That really varies. Sometimes it can be for the kind of the puzzle of it. I'm trying to work it out and try to understand this plant, but a lot of my favorites are actually weeds. Plants that people, you know, across the board hate.
Interesting.
To me, and are incredibly easy, you know, to the point sometimes of invasiveness. To me, I still love those plants for specific reasons. Usually it's because they're edible and medicinal and are just really good for my body. Like dandelions is a great example. I eat a lot of dandelion greens, but then also all our native pollinators really need them. So yeah.
You and I share some health issues, not the same health issues, but we share, like, we have health issues and we use food
Yes.
as medicine.
Yes.
I'm, I find that, like, I'll go through a good season, I'll plant a garden or plant some pots, and then I'll have a really hard season and I'll have to choose between, do I have the energy to put into these other growing things, or do I have to limit it to myself? Do you run into that?
I do now. For many years, I just pushed and pushed, and I could handle it, but that's just not the case now. I've really had to, over the past 5 years, come to terms with my limitations, recognize my limitations, and sometimes that means some plants are going to die, or I can't grow the 1,000 new things that I wanted to grow that year because my health is so unpredictable to a certain degree. So, you know, I may start out okay with like trays and trays of seedlings, and then it's like, I just can't cope with all of these. So I think it's teaching me a lot. And I think it's also helping me to relate to another set of people, you know, who are dealing like you, like me, who are dealing with these kinds of limitations.
What do you think you're learning about it?
I'm learning how to let go. I'm learning how to not grind myself, um, to recognize my boundaries, my physical limits. Um, yeah, there's a lot. There was a lot in there, especially at the beginning, because when I got sick, it happened really dramatically, and it was in the summer, high summer, when the plants need a lot of care, especially the container plants. And I went outside one day because it was very difficult. I had long periods where I wasn't able to go into the garden at all. I could just look at it from the window. And one evening I went outside and I just broke down because there was so much devastation. Like, so much had died, so much had just fried to a crisp, and it was really hard for me to see. There's a lot of ego in there too that became very clear to me. It's like it wasn't just my relationship with the plants, it was also the ego of, I made this, and what am I if I can't do this in the way that I want to do it.
Oh, how interesting. I hadn't even thought about that as part of it.
I think especially because I'm a garden writer and I show my garden, there is sometimes, like I said, that difficulty in showing the failures, showing where I'm not perfect. And so it really brings me face to face with that in a different way. I've let go of a lot of, and I had already been doing a lot of work around letting that go anyway, but it really pushed that in a more profound way.
Hmm. Let's back up for just a second. So you were coding and doing some web development work, and then you got into writing online. And then when does a book come into it? Like, when do you think, you know what, I should do a book?
I love books, so it was 2004 when I started the first book, and 2005 when it came out. Um, Really, I just got lucky. I had no idea how to go about doing a book and getting a deal, like, you know, any of that kind of thing. But someone contacted me. I had a few agents contact me, but they always seemed wrong. And then finally, one came along that seemed right. And so that was how that happened.
Gotcha. And then is that the same agent that took you through the other books?
No, unfortunately, she left the business, and I had to find a new agent. Yeah.
Let's talk about that process a little bit. So when you have to go out and do it, what does that look like?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me. I still even now feel very outside that world. Um, at the time, I think what I did was I didn't really, even at that time when I had to get a new agent, know very many other writers, but I did ask around a little bit if anybody knew any agents. Um, God, that was a long time ago, so I don't remember everything that I did, but I know I did ask around a little bit as far as I could.
Did you do the book proposals and send
Mm.
them out to the agents and do the shopping around and all of that?
Well, first I had to find a new agent, and by then, because I already had one book, it was in a body of work. It was easy enough to just approach agents saying, I'm looking for an agent." Um, and then once I found a new one, then I think I may have already had a proposal
Hmm.
for another book by then, or at least the start of one. If I do recall, she had kind of a different idea. Like, every agent kind of has different ideas about what um, a proposal should look like. And I
Hmm.
found even with this agent over the years, she shifted. So the
Interesting.
proposals I used to do with her in the beginning are very different than the proposals that I do now. They're actually a little bit looser now, not so rigid.
Not so formal, like when we think
Yeah.
of the formal book proposal.
Yeah.
It's probably helpful to have the same agent in many ways because you get to grow with them. They get to know you.
Yeah. She has a lot of other clients though, so it's not like long periods of time go where
Right.
I don't hear from her. She doesn't know what I'm doing. So in a way, every time we communicate, it's it's not a complete starting over, but it is a here's where I am now.
And your books are slightly different. I mean, they're not like, you're not like a series person who does the same type of thing every time. You're exploring new things.
Well, that has to do with time and age and experience. The first one was of its time and of where I was at the time, and also where we were culturally at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard to sell a book that, it's funny because if I look back at that book, it doesn't seem at all outside of the mainstream. But at the time it was. At the time it was really hard to sell that idea. I couldn't even put the word organic on the cover because that was considered fringe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you could have
and
started something then.
and it was an urban gardening book, but they were really, like, every publisher I talked to was really nervous about the idea of doing an urban gardening book. And so even when it came to the cover, they didn't want it to look too urban because
Interesting.
they felt it would alienate the suburban audience. So 5 years later, when I did my second book, it was not at all weird that they were like, of course you would put organic on the cover. There were other weird limitations, but things like that were now considered completely normal. And urban gardening was now considered more mainstream and not at all unusual.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy the process of a book?
I enjoy making the book. I don't enjoy pitching the book. I don't enjoy that aspect of it, but I enjoy making. It's just me in the middle of the doing. I do enjoy it.
Do you have a favorite one?
The last one.
The Grow Curious.
Yeah.
I love that
We
one too.
self-published it, and through Kickstarter. So that was really a different experience. And also, even though I did have other people that I worked with my partner who did all the illustrations and the design. So that was, and he has for some of my other books too. So we've already had that kind of working relationship, but this was different because there was no publisher. There was nobody else from the outside setting limitations. I did have a copy editor who was great. But again, it's not the same thing as when you have a deal with a publisher and they have very specific ideas about how they want things to go.
Right.
I didn't do that in this case because I knew I needed space. This book was really not like my other books, and I knew I wanted to talk about difficult things, and I needed the space for it to evolve. I didn't want to pitch something that wasn't done. That I had clarity about what I wanted to do ahead of time, but I really needed it to evolve as I did it. And I didn't want the limitations of right from the outset, somebody saying, okay, this is what we want.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about how it's different than your other books? Like, how is Grow Curious different?
I mean, even just visually, it's different because the other books are full color photographs and they're how-to books. They're how to grow garden book. This book is not how-to at all. And it's 2-color. So visually, it's very different. The images it's all illustrated, and the images are, I don't want to say darker, but they're not, it's not like bright and cheery in the same way as my other books are. My other books are more like candy, and this book's not like that. And it's also sort of about the why to garden. So it's about your experience in the garden, your individual experience in the garden. It's about stepping back and not spending the whole time that you spent in the garden doing the work of gardening, but observing what's happening in the garden, having a relationship with the garden, and also at the same time a relationship with yourself. The experiences that you have in the garden can reflect back onto you, your relationship with yourself.
I would say that your earlier books are the how to do it, like all the physical aspects of doing it. And then this last book is your experience inside your body, how you feel about it, what you learn from it, what it feels like. It's a very experiential experience. Like, you're grounded in yourself while you're working in it. I
And
loved it.
sometimes you're not working. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because one of the issues that I know is really common for a lot of gardeners is that we can get very stuck on what we have to do, and what needs to be done. So like one of the very first activities I have is to just go and walk around the garden. If you can walk, if you have a balcony and you can't walk around, just sit in a chair
Mm-hmm.
and not do anything, just look.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard thing to do for a lot of gardeners. For years, I could not sit in my garden at all, barely even with other people, because I was always looking around and seeing what I wanted to do.
Mm.
And so that changed over time. And yeah, I wanted to try to bring some of that to other people who may be having the same problem. It's like
Would you
permission.
would you do a Kickstarter again? Did you enjoy that process?
I would, but I learned a lot that I would do differently. Just some mistakes that I made, but
Mm.
which is fine. I think it was a really positive experience overall. It was very stressful, but it was positive overall in that it's just such a different way to do a book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not getting permission from a publisher, instead it was the readers were backing me, and that came with such a good feeling of support
Mm-hmm.
that I hadn't had in doing the other books.
It's,
I don't. It was just very different.
it's like you're very close to the end person who's going to get it. They're telling you that they want it and that they like it and that they appreciate your work. It's all close.
Yes, yes. I'd never been comfortable about asking from the audience. Even when I sold, I had my books coming out of the years, it was really difficult to promote them. Even just asking in terms of, can you look at my book and consider buying it, was very difficult for me to do. So for me to ask the readers to give me money ahead of time to back this book so I could finish it, that was a really huge shift for me.
I think that's the thing most creatives that I've spoken to go like it's hard to put a money worth on the thing that you create and then ask for it. Why do you think that's so hard?
Oh, it's value. I don't, I don't know what it is like for everybody. For me, it is that attaching financial value to what I do. It's hard. It was hard enough for me over the years to feel a sense of real value in what I was doing. So to attach a, a number to it was is always a little bit extra difficult.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think,
also, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think also in this case, because it was the reader who was backing it directly, I felt a greater responsibility, and it felt more personal. There was less professional detachment.
So more pressure. You're feeling more pressure?
A different kind of pressure, though.
Hmm.
I didn't feel the pressure that I felt with books that I did with publishers to perform in a particular way. So that was really liberating, but I did feel a pressure of, I hope all of these many individual people like it,
Yeah.
which is hard because not everybody's going to be happy.
I see you do online stuff that I have a hard time with, which is having a sale or cutting a break for people. And like when you're barely making it as a creator, it's hard to factor that in. And you also care if other people can afford it or not, or how they're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that whole thing for you?
Oh, I've learned, it's something that I've had to work on over the years. None of it has come easy. I have been, because class has always been an issue for me. It's, the class that I come from, and class I'm still in. I have always been conscious of the cost of the stuff that I make. So when I did the earlier books with publishers, I was very conscious of how much money that book was going to cost. I didn't want to make a book that was outside of people's price points, because I knew that a lot of people who were readers were coming from a similar place to me. So I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't make one of those like super beautiful hardcover, like matte, you know, gorgeous pages kind of book, because they're just too expensive for people.
Hmm.
It's different when you are the one who's physically making the thing, because, you know, I mean, so I sell seeds, for example, and I grow those seeds. I like process those seeds. I package them. So it's all my labor. It's not a matter of I did a book and then if somebody else publishes it and somebody else sells it.
Mm-hmm.
Does get trickier, because I have to make sure that my labor is being covered, but at the same time I can't undersell, otherwise I can't afford to do it.
Right.
It's just something that I've got better at over the years. I can't say I'm totally where I want to be with it, but I'm better because I have to be.
Mm-hmm.
It just came to a point where it's like, I have to do this or I'm gonna be on the street.
I think I'm there right now. So I'm really listening and paying attention, because the people that are close to me who care about me and know how I structure payment and cost and factor in things, they'll say to me, Leah, you are paying to work at the end of the day. Like you're not making a profit. You have to rethink that. And I'm like, but people can't afford it. And what about the people who need it? And I have a really hard time. I'm really working on that right now. Was there
I,
anything that worked for you to like restructure how your brain thinks about it?
well, I think getting sick was really what pushed me, because I crashed.
Hmm.
I I mean, I've crashed at other times, but I was able to rebound, and this time it was just far too profound a crash, and I haven't recovered. So I just can't go back to grinding myself like that anymore. It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's like, I hate to call it a blessing because it is not, but I don't know if I would have been able to make like as much of a shift as I needed to make if it wasn't for that constant reminder of, if you do this and you crash again, remember how bad that was? That'll
Mm-hmm.
happen. There's still things that I would like to change, because I still like the idea of um, sliding scale, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been trying to figure out how to work that into how I sell things.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm not there yet in terms of what that would look like. It's a little scary because it relies on people who do have money to be honest
Right.
and generous.
That is the one thing
Fair.
that I have done, that the sliding scale. So I do workshops and I see clients one-on-one, and I will have as the ticket amount, this is how much is just the materials. And then I go up by $5 or $10 increments, saying, now you're paying a little bit more, now you're paying a little bit more, until I get to the price that I think is fair, that people around me are like, no, that's still not enough. But I'm working on this. I wonder if that translates though, because my time in the workshop or seeing a client is happening then, and you're doing the work before.
Yeah, it's a little trickier with products.
Mm-hmm.
But I still feel like there's a way, and I just have to figure it out. Just haven't got there yet. I mean, I used to do workshops and stuff like that, but I can't do that now. So when that, you know, opportunity, when I'm able to do that again, I think, you know, I'll be more mindful about how to go about it in that way.
Let's talk about self-care. So you did gardening, or maybe you still do, or you're still able to use it as self-care, but when it's not self-care anymore, what do you do for yourself?
I just let it go. That's the difference. I just don't grind myself in the same way that I used to. And I am much more accepting of, okay, well, some things are not going to make it, and that's fine.
So you would have a slower paced day, for example.
I know my seasons. I know that I have more problems at certain points in the season, depending on the weather. So, you know, I plan for that to a certain degree. And so, for example, when it gets really hot, I can't go outside and do work. I have to just let it go. And if it means that something needed to be watered and I couldn't get to it,
Yeah.
that's that. Um, I do prioritize things that plants that I need to eat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the ones that I know are really my medicine that I need. And then I also prioritize the ones that I'm going to sell because they need to be as, you know, those seeds need to be as healthy as possible coming from healthy plants. And if they're not, then I can't sell those seeds that year. You know, if I don't get the harvest from that particular plant, then that's just something I have to let go of.
I've noticed you have some other passions. One of them that I've seen is you go to like rummage sales and thrift stores and you get the most interesting things. Is that a self-care thing?
I suppose it is, in the sense that it's a joyful thing. It's something that I really enjoy doing that makes me feel good. I started going to thrift stores when I was a kid with my mother. So, and back then it was a really shameful, embarrassing thing. You know, it was like a poor person thing to do. At some point in the 90s, that shifted and thrift stores started to become a much more mainstream, like, okay thing, to the point where it's not, there's no shame attached at all anymore, as far as I can tell, in the like
Yeah.
larger culture. Um, but yeah, I like, then again, some of the places I go to, nobody, there's definitely only a small number of people who would really want to go to them. Like, I go to this one junk shop that is just full of teetering stuff. It's just boxes of stuff. It's not like a thrift store. It's like just boxes of stuff. And I know some people would find that horrifying, but to me, it's like the thrill of the hunt. And there's so much weird stuff that would never end up in a thrift store, because thrift stores still kind of go for nicer stuff to a certain degree, and the junk shop is just junk.
Yeah.
But I like junk.
What do you do with it?
Some of it I use in my home, and some of it I use in my artwork. So it's a lot of different things. It just depends on what it is and the quality is. But I like a lot of things that are unusual, that somebody made,
Mm-hmm.
that there's only one of, that's really weird. So that's usually the stuff that I just have on display in my place. And then for artwork, there's different stuff. I look for certain kinds of textiles, and I even find art supplies, like old, you know, somebody's old paints or whatever, and sometimes I'll buy those if they're still workable.
Tell me more about your art. I just recently discovered it.
um Hard to talk about my art because it goes through so many seasons. It's gone through so many seasons through my life. I got a post-secondary education in fine art, but I intended to go to school, to university, for biology. So I
Oh.
went all through high school doing, like, on the science track, doing all the maths. There were so many prerequisites that you needed, but I always made space for art, like an art class every year, and making art as much as I could on my own. And then what happened was, at the end of high school, we had grade 13 when I was a teenager. So you were 19 by the time you went to university here. They don't do that anymore. But by my last year, I realized I probably didn't want a degree in science after I had done all of that. And I'd already applied and got into a university for science. So I did end up having to go my first year as a science student, but I just was really careful about the classes that I took so that I wasn't wasting any classes.
Uh-huh.
I didn't necessarily think I wanted to do fine art. It felt really impractical. So for that first year, I was thinking maybe I was still trying to think of something practical that I could do that was more in my vein.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, eventually I just ended up reapplying for fine art. So totally impractical, but that's what I did.
So is it your self-care? Is it part of your self-care to do art?
Yes, as long as it's art that's not tied to commerce. So I have, over the years, I do creative things that are tied to commerce, to making money. I've sold photographs and all of the books that I did. There was photography and design and whatnot that I did, but that's not really self-care. That's still work.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very careful with age to try to make sure I have space to do what Linda Berry calls like doing something for no reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, just it's play, and to try not to have any attachment to whether it's good or not, to allow myself to just fuck around, basically. I think I'm a lot better at doing that than I used to be. Yeah.
Where does gardening and art for you cross over?
I think they can both be work and they can both be play. Because I do gardening, I don't garden for a living, but I do have to garden in order to gain experience to then be able to write about it.
Uh-huh.
So it's still attached to work, and obviously I show my garden, so there's that attachment as well. But at the same time, it is a very personal and private thing that I do. It's a space, a wild space where I can be wild.
Mm.
I think over the years, it's been about recognizing that, because it took me a long time. I was gardening for a long time before I realized that it was a therapy,
Mm-hmm.
that I was attracted to gardening all of those years, that all the starts and stops that I had had from my childhood on, I needed it. The thing that I always say is, as I work in the garden works on me. It's like, am I the garden's mother, or is the garden my mother? I think the garden
Yeah.
is my mother.
Mm.
um, I think my relationship to it has changed a lot over the years, but it is also still connected to my work and my livelihood. So it can get a little tricky at times.
But it occurs to me that the way you talk about doing art just to fuck around with it and not have it be good or earn money is similar to you going out into your garden and just sitting. Like,
Yes,
just, I'm here and I'm experiencing this.
I just need to do it. I need to express myself. I have a very strong need to express myself. And at the times in my life where I didn't give myself that space, I really suffered for it. So even though money is so tight
Mm-hmm.
and my energy is so defined now, I just don't have the energy that I used to have, and things are so unpredictable. I really know that part of my healing is that I need to have that balance.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely required, or I'm never going to heal. Physically, I'm not going to heal if I don't create that space for myself.
Mm.
That what I think of as my wildness. I need to expand.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I have a partner who understands that.
And your partner is Gavin, right?
Savin, yeah.
And they did the art for this last book that you were mentioning earlier. Are they an artist otherwise? And
Yeah, he also did a fine art degree. And we've known each other a long time.
Hmm.
We've been together since I was just turning 20. So 26 years. And he does graphic design for a living still. But he also makes space to make his art as well, which he doesn't sell.
Mm.
Again, it's just doing stuff for no reason.
Just because you want to, just because it feels good, and not feeling like you have to justify that to
Well,
somebody.
because I truly believe that we're all creative people. Every person is creative, because creativity is just expressing ourselves, and everybody has a different way of doing that. Not everybody necessarily wants to sit down and draw something or stitch something. But if we don't make space for to express ourselves in whatever way we need to express ourselves, we're hurting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
How do you define success for yourself, for in life, in anything?
I'm not sure, but I do know that I have for a long time um, really valued this quote by Audre Lorde that is, if I don't define success for myself, hold on, I have it here somewhere. If I didn't define she doesn't say success. I always associate it with success though. She says, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for meat and eaten alive.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think I always associate that with success because there were times in my life where I was very successful, but I felt like it was somebody else's fantasy that I was living through. Like it didn't feel like success as it meant to me. So I don't have the words for it, but I know it it has to come from me and who I am, and
Yeah.
not feel like a performance, like I'm performing
Mm-hmm.
success or I'm performing a certain kind of person.
So day to day, is that a thing that you think about at the end of the night, whether you did X, Y, Z, or is it more of a feeling?
I think it's more of a feeling.
Mm.
Um, Although feelings can be tricky sometimes too. um, it is such a hard one because,
Yeah.
and I think partly why it's so difficult for me right now is because since getting sick, I've really had to reevaluate so much. I've
Yeah.
had to reevaluate how I valued myself, um, within a capitalist,
Right.
patriarchal society. Um, there was a lot that I realized that I was holding on to, that I would say one thing in my mind, but in my body, I was feeling something very different. And I've really been exploring and learning how to just value myself for being. I don't
Yeah.
have to be good. I don't have to be successful. I don't have to make a certain amount of money. I don't have to have a certain number of people reading my books. It's hard because I also live in a world that wants me to define myself in very specific ways, and I
Mhm.
come up against it all the time. This conflict, but I'm trying to get to a place where I can deal with that external and not have it become an internal conflict.
I think I love this question because of that. I think that if you've taken the time or you've had circumstances in your life that have made you have to reevaluate, you as a person get to a place where you have to let go of the prescriptive um, assuming that we should be a certain way and that equals success or that equals good. But a person who has illness or hardships, you will never be successful then.
Not
Not,
by those terms,
yeah.
no. Even when I was grinding myself to the bone and was like on the outside seemingly successful, it still didn't feel right. It
Mm-hmm.
still didn't, it was never enough. When I had to pitch a book or ask for a certain amount of money for a job, suddenly someone would come to me and say, can you come and give this talk here, or can there were a bunch of different things that I did, and when I tell them what my cost was, suddenly, like they would contact me and say, you're so great, we love your work, and then I ask for my rate, and it was like, well, you're not that
Mm.
good. And I wasn't even charging too much then. So it's that's how I see that quote from Audre Lorde, that you're
Mm-hmm.
never going to be enough
Right.
externally, that you have to find it in yourself. Um, so I guess for me, part of success, I know, is how the work feels, um, recognizing that it's not going to be perfect, that not everybody's going to like it, But I find the work that I'm doing now, I feel a stronger connection to other people. And that for me is part of the success,
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like I'm connecting more. I don't feel as isolated as I did before. I'm certainly not performing in any of the ways that I was before. So that feels more successful.
I love that. The connection. It's so important.
What else is there?
So those people, let's keep those people in mind. Do you have one or two things that you would say, here's what's working for me in self-care as a creative person to take good care of myself? Do you have a couple of tips that you would pass on?
Hmm. I don't know. I didn't mention all the other things I do in self-care. I like food. We talked about
Yes.
food as medicine is a big one. I'm very careful about that. I have to have movement, and it's especially hard in the winter time because I live in a cold climate and I'm very disconnected from the garden, which has so much to do with my grounding
Mm,
during the growing season, that I can get very lost during the winter. That's partly why the artwork picks up during the winter for me. So I guess partly in that it's recognizing their seasons.
yeah. Yeah.
um, my body certainly has different seasons. I need a lot more support in the winter, because there's traumas that come up in the
Yeah.
winter, and because winter is a season of like nesting and going inside, and my body really needs a lot more rest in
Hmm.
the winter. And that can be very hard because that used to be a time where it was like right before the garden season started, where work picked up and it was like go 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 go, and I can't do that anymore. I have to recognize that that's a limit now.
Yeah.
um, Movement wise, I do qigong and yoga depending, sometimes, and other movement depending on where I am on any given day. That's the other thing, is really recognizing how much I can do and not sort of structuring myself in a way where it's like I have to do the same thing every day,
Hmm.
because I can't. It all depends on I just meeting myself where I am.
Giving yourself permission to be however you are that day. It's okay.
Yeah, because sometimes I need to be in bed the whole day. I
Yeah.
I can't really move, so I'll make movement small things.
Do what you can do.
Yes.
That has to be good
There's
enough.
so much in this is about self-acceptance.
Hmm.
I feel like I'm going back and I'm treating myself like I'm the parent and the child simultaneously. It's very
Yes.
vulnerable.
Yes. And I think that we have to.
Yeah.
I do. I believe that's our job to do.
I'm in my late 40s now. I'm not a parent, but I I think I have a more mature concept of what parenting is like. And I think that has allowed me to reparent myself
Hmm.
in a way that I didn't get in my childhood,
Yeah.
while also still remaining the adult.
We could
Can
do like a
do a
whole nother
whole
hour about this because there's
I know.
my garden's in there. Yeah, but we only have like 2 more minutes. So let me ask you a fun one for a second before
Okay.
we have to go. The last year or so, I've noticed that you have these insects that you're showcasing on your IG stories. Tell me more about those. Where did they come from? Have you always loved bugs? What is happening?
It's definitely another one of those things that I'm finding I'm doing a lot of things at this point in my life that I really found pleasure in as a child and then didn't do through my adult life for whatever reason. And now I'm just like, I really love insects. And I'm just when it started with some snails that I brought in from the garden. It was like so childlike in that sense, like the little kid who puts the snails in a glass container with some mesh on top.
Mhm.
Um and I just found that as I started bringing insects in from the garden, that I had this new appreciation for them as they are. I wasn't thinking of them as, oh, this is the snail that eats my lettuce and
Yeah.
ruins my crop. Instead, it was like, this is a really beautiful creature on its own. It gave me a new appreciation. I don't like centipedes, for example, but I brought a centipede in, and I've had that centipede in my care for like a year and a half, almost 2 years now. And I completely still don't love centipedes, but I don't want a centipede in my pants, for example, or crawling up my leg, but I have changed. I really appreciate and love this creature and really, enjoy caring for it. And spiders really became a big thing for me, particularly.
Yes.
Arachnids. We when we moved into this place, we had a lot of spiders that would take up residency in our kitchen window in the fall.
Mm.
And we were totally cool with that. But now it's just like spider house. There's just spiders everywhere. It's like, especially the last year, spiders just started showing up in my life. And I was like, okay.
They pass the word on. They know it's safe over there, and they're all coming over.
Well, it's safe in the garden because I don't use anything. So I've made a habitat that's safe for all these creatures too. So as the years have gone on with this garden, I found more and more creatures all the time coming into the space that I'd never seen before. So, but it's like, it began with this exploration of all these new creatures outside,
Mm-hmm.
visiting the garden and learning about them. And then I started bringing some in.
There's some that you show that shed their exoskeleton. That's
Well, they all do.
fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. So it went from just bringing insects in from the garden to then actually buying insects. We do have limitations in terms of what we're allowed to have, but like the first ones that I bought from an entomologist. They're called amblypygids, and they are arachnids, but they don't have fangs or venom or anything like that. They're cave dwellers from warm climates, and I have 2 different species, and yeah, they're so cool. And when they shed their exoskeleton, it's a very vulnerable process that they go through. So I found that to be a really interesting sort of life learning watching them, but also they're almost fluorescent. They're like white and then this like fluorescent yellow color. Yeah. And then eventually their new exoskeleton hardens. But it's so fascinating watching what they go through. The whole process is like.
Would you call them pets?
Oh yeah.
They're your
yeah.
pets?
I mean, I care for them. I love them, not in a way that I love my dog. We're not going to cuddle, but
they probably would want to.
I don't touch them. I have a very hands-off policy with them because I think that it's just stressful. So I never handle or touch them, and try to leave them be as much as possible. But I still do. Yes, I do think of them as my pets.
That's awesome.
It's not
Thank
like
you so much for joining me today and sharing your heart, sharing your energy, sharing your self-care tips. I really enjoyed it, Gayla.
Me too.
Gayla, where can people find you online?
YouGrowGirl.com is my website, my main website, and I have on Instagram and on Twitter, I'm also YouGrowGirl. And then also, if you want to see my art, on GaylaTrail, so just my name on Instagram.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.